Okay, good evening everybody. My name is Saku Mantere. I'm the director of the Marcel Desautels Institute of Integrated Management. And I wish to welcome you all to this event. It might be fair to say that we are the generation whose kids are in an unfortunate position of probably having a harder life than many generations before them, including ours. Climate change is a truly wicked problem. I was just talking to a musician who was born in the 40s and who was thinking back on, he's just published an album called Hoping Without Hope. And he was thinking back on his childhood, how the 50s and 60s were much more of an hopeful period, even though they had the nuclear threat and sort of, he was born in the USA, so the Soviet threat was a really tangible one. But they saw Nikita Khrushchev, visit the country, and he looked like a funny old farmer, and all of a sudden, sort of, world seemed like a brighter place. Climate change is somewhat different in terms of sort of, not having easy solutions, requiring coordination across the globe, across the different sectors of society, which that there hasn't been a need like that faced by humankind before. So we are very happy to have with us discussants who are able to kind of really delve deeply into the problems of, in particular, how does business make sustainability, an issue? How does it make it legitimate? How can we make it strategic? As you can see, this particular event, if you were watching the slides, is a gold standard event by the McGill Office of Sustainability. All our events at the Institute are, so it's not for this event in particular. So let me say a couple of words about our esteemed guest, Mike Gerbis, who is the CEO of the Delphi Group and Globe series. For over 2 decades, he has advised some of the nation's largest companies, institutions, and government bodies on how to embrace sustainability as a strategic advantage to achieve long-term value. So he's an engineer with an aptitude for business strategy, holds a Master of Environmental Engineering from McMaster University and a Bachelor's of Applied Science in Chemical Engineering from Queen's University. So prior to joining Delphi Group, he owned and operated a successful environmental engineering consulting firm which focused on developing and implementing corporate pollution prevention strategies. So he's also a passionate advocate for community well-being and youth empowerment, having co-founded 2 not-for-profit organizations, the Climate Reality Project Canada and the Emerging Environmental Leaders Forum. He is currently chair of Clean Act Champions, a steering committee member for the Energy Futures Lab, and regularly engages with youth and business leaders across the country on matters of sustainability. So warm welcome, Mike. Thanks for being here. We are equally excited, although we see much more of her, because she's a faculty member, a good colleague of ours here at McGill, our own Professor Paola Perez-Aleman. So Paola is Associate Professor of Strategy and Organization, like myself, at the Desautels Faculty of Management, as well as an Associate Faculty Member at McGill's Institute for the Study of International Development. She earned her PhD from MIT and her BSc from the University of California at Berkeley. Her expertise lies at the intersection of management, strategy, and development, and her research explores organizational and institutional processes that foster equity, inclusive innovation, poverty alleviation, and sustainability. Her commitment to integrating social and environmental issues extends beyond her research to teaching and community engagement. A few highlight recognitions include being named a Faculty Pioneer Award finalist by the Aspen Institute and receiving the McGill Award for Equity and Community Building, which recognizes outstanding achievement, initiative, and impact in the domains of equity, inclusion, and community building. So thank you, Paola, also for being here tonight. So now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our discussants on stage.
before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that McGill University and its surrounding area is located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among indigenous people, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. McGill honors, recognizes, and respects these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet today. We are here to discuss a challenge that is one of the hardest problems that we face today, and it's a growing problem. The issue of climate change and how we turn things around to be able to address it and stop it from growing. We know that right now with climate change, if it remains unchecked, it is the crisis that we are facing today, it's going to grow. And in 2015, there was a new agreement to do something about that brought together countries from all over the world around climate change. And this was a very bottom-up process that brought countries to define plans of action to deal with the climate change challenge. And currently, as you know, the recent report that came out in October by the Intergovernmental Panel report, it's telling us that the problem is growing, that we need to do more, that there are insufficient actions being taken, whether by business, by government, and by communities. And in this issue of climate change, businesses have a huge responsibility. I mean, some figures put that we account for the businesses for 75% of the problem. So this is important for our management school at McGill to hold this conversation, and we're very happy to have Mike Gerbis here, who has been working all over Canada with business and government on these issues. So thank you very much for being with us here tonight. One of the aspects that we want to address is this effort by Canada as part of this climate change agreement. Canada has also developed its own plan. You know, this is part of the characteristic of the climate change accord. In fact, it's sort of the nature of what made it a successful agreement. One of the natures that enabled this agreement to occur is because each country can develop its own plan. So today, we want to delve deeper into what Canada is doing. It established its pan-Canadian framework on clean growth, on climate change. And more recently, it also created an updated plan and set up several innovation funds to move businesses, to move municipal governments, to move provincial governments to do something about these issues. So this is the context of our conversation today with Mike. Now, before we get started, Mike, with questions, I would like to ask you if you can introduce us a bit about your organization and what Delphi is doing.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out on this cold evening. First, before I just tell you, give you a 2-minute on the organizations I represent, just curious on the audience, how many students? Any students? And profs? Okay, I'll watch you guys. Okay. And public, general public? Okay, great. Okay. So I'm the CEO. You heard 2 companies. I actually oversee 4 organizations, and I'm really proud of this. This is a new business model that we've taken called the Constellation model. So these 4 organizations are all independent entities. They have their own mission, but they all are directed towards a common vision. And that common vision is to create a sustainable, prosperous, and socially just future in a generation. And I say that in a generation because of what was said earlier about climate change. That it's something I've been involved in now for 20-some years and studied extensively And it is the #1 challenge that we face. But it is something that can be solved. And so the model here is to try to bring together different organizations that are focused on making positive change. So the consulting group, Delphi, works with municipal, provincial, federal government, and corporations across all sectors of society. Climate change risk management, corporate sustainability, clean innovation, and green economic growth. Those are our areas of focus. The Globe series is about convening, because together, well, to solve this problem, we have to come together. And so Globe series convenes large conferences like our Globe Forum Conference, which is the largest sustainability conference in North America, or small, intimate, and influential conversations. Like last year, we had 18 of the largest company CEOs together with the finance minister, Minister of Environment, and Premier. So convening is key. The third component, which a number of you are part of, that I think is essential to solving this problem, is youth, is that next generation. And Leading Change is an organization that is there to activate leadership and help young people get the skills and knowledge they need to make positive change. And the final organization is called the XL Partnership, which is a peer-to-peer learning organization. And it brings together, there are 16 members at the moment, the largest companies in Canada, their VPs of sustainability or environment, to share lessons learned, best practices, and again, to accelerate the change within their organization. So that's a model that we've started, and we hope to add other organizations, not by merging or purchasing, but by inviting them in to grow our influence and impact and really make a difference. So thank you very much, Paula, for having me here. Thank you, Megan, and everyone for organizing. Really appreciate it, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. So you talk about convening, bringing different public, private, plural organizations together. How do you engage them? In the sense that, how do you make the case? The recent report from the IPCC is telling us we're not doing enough. We need to do more. So how do you make the case? Why should more organizations become engaged on issues of sustainability? Why should they be more engaged on addressing the problems of climate change?
Right. So the one thing, when I started early in my career, I would go at these companies based on the ethical, moral, environmental issue, and that didn't work so well. And it still doesn't work well with a lot of cases, because what drives, I'll talk about private sector first, but private sector is risk and reward. And this is the business case that I often talk. I was talking to these great students here earlier today about that to get companies engaged in talking about the issue, you need to bring them to the table along with civil society and government and clean technology firms, but to align them with what's most important to them. And for private sector, that's making money or reducing risk. And so that lens is used all the time. So risk is things like having your production disrupted if you're a mining company and all of a sudden you have a 500-year flood, or the disruption of your tailings pond and what's that going to cost you. Or the opportunity, right, to reduce fuel use and save money, or to engage your employees and attract good employees, or gain market share through new products. So always aligned with their business priorities is a #1 item to bring people together to talk about that.
Right. So the director of the IPCC report says that we need to turn the economy on a dime. And that, in a sense, inspired the title of our talk this evening. So I would like to ask you, can you indicate whether this turning the economy on a dime is on a wide basis? Do you see it as something that's possible?
That's possible. So the hopeful side of me says yes. okay? The technologies that we have already in place can reduce our emissions significantly. The challenge is deployment and changing not only behavior, but also institutional structures, right? We are driven by fossil fuels, our economy, we heat our homes, we drive our cars, right? And there's a time lapse, even just to change the design of a car from one style to another, let alone from gas to electricity. However, we've seen this before where we were asked to go to the moon. We've been asked to tackle challenges like AIDS, and we've turned. We've focused the innovation and the ingenuity, right, and come together from all walks of life to solve issues and solve them fairly rapidly. And I think this can be done, but it needs massive investments, right? Massive change in behavior, massive change in the infrastructure that we have. So we need to electrify our grid, electrify our transportation, or get onto other fuels, hydrogen, right, ethanol. We need to increase building standards rapidly. So we're building homes that are net zero, right? We need to invest in renewable energy, and so on and so forth. It can be done, and it can be done with technologies that we have today. We just need to accelerate the influx of capital and our action very quickly.
So if we already have ways to approach this problem, what is keeping the companies from doing it? I mean, assuming, say, that investment, I mean, Canada has put in its plan investment funds, and assuming that we already have some sense as to what needs to be done, as you say, then what keeps companies from doing more? What is holding us back?
So that's a complex question, but I'll try to give a few examples. First and foremost is our economic system, right? So we're driven by profit. And in North America, even much more so than Europe, that reports on an annual basis, often companies here report on a quarterly basis, which means we're making decisions that are very short-term. They're short-sighted in the sense that we will deploy capital, but we need a return on investment. We need to get our money back plus interest in 3 years, 1.5 years, and that just doesn't work when you need to make huge transitional changes to your infrastructure, right? Or to your building even, right? To retrofit this building, you can probably get a return on investment for lights for LED maybe in 1.5 years. But if you're doing the envelope and the windows, you're talking 7, 11, 12 years, right? So short-term versus long-term outlook is one. Two is we got to remember, and I said this to the students today, right, is we often point the finger and say industry is bad, oil and gas is bad, retail is bad. When we point the finger, 3 are pointing back at us, right? They're producing products that we're buying. We're buying new cell phones every year, right? We're buying the new vehicle, and we have to take responsibility for our actions, and that's tough. Change in behavior is tough. You know, I want to go on vacation with my family, so I go rather than getting a divorce with my wife, right? Okay, or upsetting my kids, right? Or I do business, and I have to fly around the country and go to Europe to the climate conference to do business, but I'm adding a whole bunch of emissions there, right? So there's fundamental components of our system that we're kind of locked in, and we have to change that significantly.
Right, so on this issue of change is where your company has been doing a lot of work, and you've been doing different strategies around mitigation, around adaptation, around issues of green economy. So what, could you give us some examples of ways in which your work is enabling the companies? How do you work then
For sure.
to move them along these areas of infrastructural change or in the ways in which they're doing their processes?
Yeah. So it varies significantly depending upon the client and where they're at, right? So we work with leading companies that are really at the forefront of change and trying to drive their businesses to become more sustainable. So with those companies, that's where we're at the what we call the bleeding edge, right? So we're trying to help them, for example, innovate faster, innovate differently, invest in new technologies, artificial intelligence, for example. Where can that help? One company, we're working with them to electrify their entire mine site, right? Using AI and sophisticated equipment, go to electric vehicles, right? Secondly, you'll get those companies that are, let's call them followers. They're mid-level. They want to make sure they meet the regulations. They want to do incremental change, right? There, we're trying to push them in areas of efficiency, or just set targets, or just have an employee engagement program where they're engaging their employees to take action. And these are, again, business cases that we make with each company, right? So we have to understand the culture and understand what they're willing to do. Are they willing to really go out there in front and be a leader? I'll give you an example. We just started working with a large financial institution that is, they want to be front and center, a leader. And so we're helping them develop a strategic plan that has two components. One, a sustainability side, and two, a climate risk analysis over their portfolio. That's fantastic. But many others are not going to go that far. They don't want to be out front. So again, we're always looking to engage the company, understand their culture, understand their priority, and then create the business case that makes sense for sustainability or climate change to be integrated into that corporation.
So you say innovate faster. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting when you read the Canadian framework and its contribution to the climate change agreement, Canada's commitment. Innovation appears everywhere. And that makes sense because we're talking about changing what we're doing, how we're doing it. It means changing our products, changing our processes, changing our organizations. So I can definitely see how central this is. So when you say innovating faster, can you give us some examples of what facilitates that faster innovation? And can you also give us some examples of where you're seeing Canada really moving forward as an innovator in this area around clean technology or around green economy? I mean, how is Canada doing? Which sectors? Where are you seeing areas where you're feeling this excited and where we can really learn from to see how we can facilitate more of that in other sectors or locations?
Okay. So I'll start with the first part on companies. Canada is tremendous at creating new ideas and startups. We have a number of fascinating technology, not only on the IT AI side, but on the clean tech side. And we have some companies that are growing very fast in areas of interest to help us address the climate change. And I'll just give you a few. Enerchem is a local company, does municipal waste to ethanol, methanol. Very interesting. Carbon Cure out in Vancouver, which takes CO2 and recycles it into cement to drive down CO2 emissions. Agriculture, we're very good. There's Terramera, and Farmer's Edge. Right? These are digitalization technologies to make, say, the application of water, right, to the fields very precise. Drive the tractors in line with GPS, again, so you have less loss, et cetera, et cetera. Very fascinating. Where Canada has fallen down in the past, and this is no disrespect to these great companies or others that are doing really well, is that we have a challenge in scaling and then deploying the technology and then exporting the technology. And I'm not saying we don't have great companies doing that. We have lots of great companies doing that. But where we've struggled is in that area. So what you've seen in the last few years is the Canadian government, provincial governments, and the industry come together to try to find ways to accelerate that, right? To overcome those challenges and to be able to scale our industry and deploy it faster. So the federal government put $2 billion into clean technology and moved it into areas like Sustainable Development Technology Canada, which helps companies demonstrate their technology, which is a key barrier. EDC and BDC, two large crown corps that help companies, again, scale and then export their technologies and put it into funds. We're seeing industry organizations come together and work together and share IP around technology innovation. So this is fascinating, where they're kind of putting aside the competitiveness part to work and have a one window access to their companies around technologies, which again reduces the barriers. And then we have groups, accelerators in that across the country that are working with these small companies to educate them, right? A lot of startups, the founders often don't know what they don't know. And this causes friction when they have to raise capital and they don't know how to do that or market their technology. And these accelerators across the country are working with them to educate them, mentor them, provide them guidance so that they can grow faster. So lots of good stuff going on.
Yeah, so this is interesting. You mentioned collective efforts by companies. Recently, Canada went through all the negotiations over the trade agreements, renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement, and this brought to light the challenge that Canada faces also in terms of diversifying its markets. And so I'm wondering here whether you've seen that there is, and usually trade issues bring collective efforts, between companies. So I'm wondering if you have seen any convergence between this concern for diversifying Canada's economy and the issues of sustainability and innovation. Do you see any ways in which maybe these industry associations may be moving in this direction, or is there a way that we could foster more integration, actually? Because from the one hand, Canada is saying we have this plan. On the other hand, economically, we talk about diversification. Are these two parallel things, or how can they be integrated more?
Yeah, absolutely, they're integrated, right? This is the key, is if we transition our economy, right, to a clean economy, a low carbon, sustainable economy, that means we can't continue to do what we've been doing for 100 years, right? We need to do it differently. And so to do that, we need new technologies, new solutions, new processes to work. So if we're going to continue to produce oil and gas, then we need to figure out new ways that we can use them that don't contribute to CO2 in the atmosphere. If we're going to mine materials that are essential to our economy and our prosperity, we need to figure out ways to do that more sustainably. And this works to Canada's favor, because if we can develop, well, let me stop and say, a lot of our knowledge and expertise in the clean tech sector is aligned to our main industries, right? So we are good at innovating for agriculture, good at innovating in the resource sectors. So if we can do that, we not only help our Canadian companies become more competitive, more sustainable, but then we can turn around and export these technologies to other countries, right? So it's a win-win-win all the way across.
Are there examples already where you see Canada being competitive in export markets linked to clean technologies, green economy activities?
Yeah, there are several. Again, we have a number of technologies in areas such as small hydro, in the oil and gas sector, digitalization areas, waste management, water, another one, good water. Again, we're very good at niche technology. So you'll find Canadian expertise across all parts of the economy that we're doing very well. Yeah.
All right. So turning attention to government, you're talking about enabling conditions, and the plans put out multi-billion-dollar funds for the green economy and clean technology. How does the articulation between these government initiatives and business get going? How can this get going faster? And I'm wondering here, how informed are both sides in terms of what the firms need in order to be able to address the innovation challenge, and whether firms are also knowledgeable about what the government is, the resources that the government has put out there, or promised anyway, to put out there.
So we're just talking innovation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what's been great is the Liberal government came out with a pledge for $2 billion, but instead of just dispersing it, it did go to the community. It did go to the accelerators, the clean technology firms, and so forth, and engage them around where that money should go. And the clean tech companies and associations actually wrote letters in that advocating for specific components of where that money should go. And the Liberal government listened to them in several areas, and I think you'll find maybe the clean tech folks think not in others. But they've made massive steps forward. What's continuing, though, is the education. So a lot of clean technology companies, again, small, right? They're small startups. They're worrying about the day-to-day cash flow, right? Are not necessarily, don't understand where they can access funds, how to access those funds. But what you're seeing is the government and even organizations like us engage the industry to educate them on this. And then vice versa, you're seeing the technology companies engaging the government around how they can better help them. So, and there's always a friction there, right? It's always a tension, and things don't go as fast as you want, but things are starting to pick up because the financial sector is getting involved. So we have a big conference called Globe Capital that focuses on the intersection of infrastructure, investment, and clean innovation. And here we bring the banks and the pension funds and the insurance companies together with clean technology companies, government, to talk about how we mobilize and accelerate that deployment of capital. And what you're seeing is that the banks, the finance, the pension funds, the insurance companies are getting interested in this. They want to put money into our clean tech innovation sector. They want to put money into clean innovation at large, or sustainable infrastructure. And that's fascinating. That's a big change in the game from my standpoint, being in it for so long, that we haven't seen before, is the interest of the financial institutions to now address climate change and to get involved in putting their money into clean tech innovation.
All right, so going along this, the finance issue and the finance interest, let me read over here some of the things that the government has announced in terms of investment. So it says $2 billion low carbon economy fund to support provincial and territorial actions to reduce emissions by 2030. It says $22 billion to support green infrastructure, including electricity, renewable energy, and support for northern and remote communities. Then it says $20 billion to support urban public transit, and over $2.2 billion in funding for clean technology initiatives, financing clean tech firms. So on the one hand, talk about the financial sector and investments, but we also see clearly here the government also trying to make investments. So what are the mechanisms here? How does this work? And if you could tell us also how at the level of different governments, provincial and municipal levels, how these interact with these sort of federal level initiatives, and where do you see more advances in how these are being used? What are the mechanisms in how these actually get concretized into transforming the economy?
Right. So the different initiatives that Paola mentioned they're quite different in their focus. So for example, the 2.2 billion is money that went into BDC, EDC, SDTC that I talked about to really scale clean technologies, okay, in deployment and demonstration. The infrastructure fund is the infrastructure bank, which will actually leverage private sector financing. And this is a key, right? Is that governments, what we want governments to do is infuse dollars to kickstart things. They've always done it. It's part of the market practice that they've always done. And we want them to infuse dollars into research and development and helping scale technologies and be a first user demonstrator and so forth. But they also want to make sure that they're leveraging that money, right, with private sector investment. So the money, the infrastructure bank, for example, is applications will come in for green infrastructure projects, right, which will transit, let's say, mass transit or that, and they will look to multiply the amount of money that they put into a project from, say, a pension plan. And these are the types of innovative financing mechanisms that we want to see. So ways that risk from the government is lowered by private sector engagement, okay? And that can happen if it's done well. It can help not only the taxpayers, but also the private sector, and more importantly, the user. If it's not done well, then we have some challenges, which we've seen in the past.
So continuing with this, the idea of the bottom-up processes is very much characteristic, let's say, of the climate change agreement. So Canada sets out these plans, but so can you take us lower down to provincial and municipal level in terms of how they are establishing commitments and plans and acting on this? And it would be good for us to learn also how do you, because you work Canada-wide, how things look in different provinces. Where do you see, some provinces moving faster in turning things around? Or do you see this more at the municipal level where things are turning around faster? That this would be, I think, for us, because we're Montreal, we're in Quebec. Yes, we have Canada-wide and international perspective, but you're really moving in this world across provinces. So tell us what you're seeing. And then at the end, you can tell us how Quebec is doing in relation to others. So where do you see us? Yeah.
So it's always so when you get involved, when you get to the political level, as you all know, it gets really fuzzy and it changes fast, right? So if you go back just 5-7 years during the Harper government time, federally we weren't going anywhere. I would contend the government didn't even understand the science, it discarded the science of climate change. And so what you saw is this swell from municipalities, Vancouver, Montreal, taking the lead along with a number of provinces, BC, Alberta, Quebec, right, cap and trade, and taking the leadership role in driving forward actions and policies around climate change. The sad thing is that we have this wave of populism that has come up here, and we now have some provincial governments, Ontario and possibly soon Alberta, that are pushing back now, and we're taking steps back. In Ontario, Premier Ford basically disbanded the cap and trade without any analysis whatsoever. It was just a vendetta, in my opinion. And that's not what we need, right? That is not what we need at all. To take action, and it doesn't matter what political stripe you are, to take action, we need to put a price on carbon, That can be in various forms. It can be a cap and trade, it can be a carbon tax, it can be a regulation. A regulation is still a price, okay? But we need a price on things. That's the mainstay of making change. If we have to pay more for something, then we will change our behavior, generally, okay? And so it's critical now that we start to figure out ways that we align with these governments and with the politicians to ensure that the policies we're putting forward to them are aligned with their objectives. And it's a funny thing because carbon tax, carbon price is actually a conservative policy that puts a price so that the market then makes the change, right? So if you put a price on carbon dioxide emissions, then people change their behavior and the market changes along with it. So there are lots of people trying to work with those governments and sort of turn them back to show that this is a positive for Canada and it's a positive for our industries and it's a positive for individuals like us who are now feeling you know, the climate change impacts. I'm from Ottawa and we had 6 tornadoes land in our city. I've lived there 25 years and I can only remember one on the outskirts of Ottawa before that. So, and that's going to be the norm.
So you highlighted, in a sense, some regression, let's say, in some cases. What about, where do you see
the progression.
Yeah, progression,
yeah.
Yes.
So the progression is happening. What's great is you know, you can go down into the depths pretty quickly if you read like I do the science and so forth. But all you have to do is turn to communities, to individual actions, right? To even provinces, like province of Quebec is going forward with its cap and trade and continuing that, right? It's got a policy in place. I think it's 15% electric vehicles. You know, these types of policies are progressive. And what's great is no matter what happens at the political level, you still see individuals innovating, right? And being positive, creating new technology, and companies trying to make a difference. And there's a lot of good stuff going on.
And do you see a division of labor? I'm wondering, you know, we talk green economy, there are many sectors, clean technology, many sectors. Do you see certain things that are being done at the municipal level or where more possibilities in certain sectors at the municipal level, like when we talk about public infrastructure, which is one of the points that is highlighted here in the plan, urban public transit, 20 billion to support. So where would the initiatives come from that? Would that be?
So if you take municipalities, right, they're at the front lines of us. And so I'm always a believer that they have the biggest impact to do community initiatives. On the negative side, adaptation is best, you know, with municipalities and policies. But the implementation of, as you said, mass transit, right, biking lanes, right. If they could change some things, fuel taxes, right. Building, now building codes tend to be either federally or provincially, but as we saw in Vancouver, I believe they made some changes on their own. And Vancouver or Montreal is doing a lot of great stuff. Vancouver's sort of the leader in North America to see what they can do. Provincially, you're responsible for the implementation of the regulation. So that's where cap and trade, although I'd prefer a cap and trade nationally, but cap and trade, carbon pricing can be implemented. Again, I'm a federalist in the sense that I think we should have a national cap and trade or a national price because we're all one country. And together, if you have a cap and trade, it allows you a bigger market to move the credits, right, across the country. So each level of government plays a role just like industry does and consumers do to move this or to solve this challenge. Yeah.
All right. So one of the issues with bottom-up is the flexibility that it gives you to make the plans as in areas in which you see most relevant. At the same time, that can also lead to a lot of very local initiatives that are not learning from what others are doing in other localities. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, is there a way in which your organization, or are there others who are promoting more learning across mm-hmm. municipalities or across provinces, across companies to learn from whatever those local initiatives are being created?
Yeah. There's lots of group, well, either conferences or convening sessions like we put on, but there's local groups, even in McGill, the guys are bringing together different departments, different people to talk and share lessons learned. FCM puts on, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities puts on a conference every year. The Great Lakes Council, Economic Council, I think they're called, put on another event to share among municipalities. So there's lots of forums to exchange, and there's so much information online or, online that you can get to advance your knowledge in this and best practices, both nationally, right, but also internationally, because different jurisdictions, Europe is much more advanced in sustainability reporting, I would say sustainable finance, in some of the municipal areas, not necessarily others where we're better at other things.
So. You mentioned knowledge, mm-hmm. and this makes me think about us, the university, McGill University, our faculty, where we're also obviously facing the challenge also of how do we prepare better our professionals. Where do you see major gaps in the skills that we need today, and where do you see major gaps in the kinds of professionals that firms, governments, NGOs require, so that we can better address both innovation as well as mitigation, adaptation, all of these issues. So what's your thinking, and what do we need to do in our university?
So I think one great trend I'm seeing is more of an interdisciplinary approach, is that it's essential nowadays that young people come out with a multitude of skills. So if you're in a business school, that you take other courses, basic on science and engineering, just a basic one, a sociology course, a marketing course, right? Different types of courses so you understand how people work, because organizations are not all engineers, or not all business students, or not all art students, right? But to solve the problem, we all have to come together, and we need to understand the different perspectives. And I think most people around here that are here with gray hair like me know, right, as you get older, you start to realize that, geez, my perspective is not had by everybody else. I don't understand, but, and so you need to understand how people think. That's one. Two is that it's not necessarily a gap, but it's an opportunity that I believe universities, and again, I'm biased, but all universities, all disciplines, all students should be taking a course on the basics of sustainability and something about climate change. All of them. And it's very easy to implement within the curriculum. And I know that's a tough area to get into. We tried it at several universities where we developed climate change plans for them. And curriculum development or change was the hardest. But that is fundamental, because we have to get the young people understanding the changes that need to be had. So talking about the transition, right? And what does that mean if we transition? Soft skills, of course, are number one for me. If you've got a university education, you're smart. You know how to learn. But the interpersonal skills, presentation skills, business case, i.e. articulating why this is of value to someone, are all really critical skills. And I encourage young people all the time to get a mentor, you know, even when they're in school, to start to understand the nuances, right, of, you know, politics in the office, you know, different components of making a business case, right, presenting to a CEO or getting a union on board to things. So those are some.
Great. I think we can open for questions.
Great.
I see we have time now. So how shall we do it? Is there a microphone?
Oh, there's two.
There are two microphones. I see lots of hands up.
We were just,
Yeah.
The last subject was on education, and I believe it should start in kindergarten.
I agree.
Not university. I mean,
Yeah.
and it should. The governments, the school boards, whatever. I mean, they should start very young. I just
I
wanted
agree.
to point that out.
I agree. Yeah. You pick. The volunteers pick. There.
You guys choose.
This gentleman here, then here. Yeah. And then
It
we'll
may be
come
better
over.
if you come to the front. That way you can see, because there are lots of hands up here and the light is in our eyes.
Go ahead.
Hi. So my question is, you spoke about innovations happening financially between government, private enterprise, universities. I'm curious to know if you think there are innovations needed politically, and if so, you know, what you would say about that, because I was the architect on a large complex that was funded by this last SIF Liberal Strategic Infrastructure Fund, and I think there's some positives there, but there are real issues with the implementation of it.
Yeah.
And to simplify it, it's really down to similar to private enterprises having their short-term goals. There's an election cycle, and that government is pouring a lot of money into buildings that can't be properly conceived and built within 2 years from start to finish, and there's millions going to waste. And I think the net, there might be a positive value to this fund, but I've witnessed some very poor decisions being made and clients who don't know what to do with $40 million when they have to decide in a month. And so for me, that was a real eye-opener, and it's the implementation side of how we implement this, these investments. But it suggests that there needs to be some change politically so we can leverage fully that investment.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. We were talking about this before. Is well, and it's true in the private sector side too, unless you're talking pension fund investment or that, which is much longer term. But this short window of return on investment, particularly when it's a government that is developing an infrastructure project that is really for the good of the community, we shouldn't be looking at a 3-year window. The challenge, of course, as you all know, a 3-year window. Do I increase my tax base and get booted out, or do I keep it, right? And so, but there has to be some fundamental changes. And that's a whole nother topic, right, and challenge. But there has to be, because we have to make decisions that are about the long term and about the future generation and solving problems of tomorrow versus today. And one analogy I always give, and I even gave it to the Minister of Infrastructure at the time, is do we want to, there was a bridge that was going to be built for $1 billion to eliminate 100,000 cars off the road. And I said, do you seriously want to invest $1 billion into a bridge that is going to be relevant in 10 to 15 years if autonomous vehicles are coming on? Or would you rather put 500 million of that into 5G network for the entire city, right? And the other 500 million into advancing our autonomous vehicle industry in Canada? Like, these are the different types of ways we gotta, and I'm not saying that's right, I'm just saying we need to think about this differently. Because the same old is going to get us the same place, which is right now not looking too good. So I agree.
An example of an innovative decision-making process by governments at whatever level that you've seen around these issues, just building on that. So I think it's an interesting thing that we were talking about innovation.
Yeah.
And we think about the technology, we're thinking about this happening maybe at the firm level and the government is putting out, but what about
Yeah.
uh,
Well, there
at
are
the
lots of
government
good
level?
examples where, this is going to get a little too technical, so I'll try to keep it high level. But when they're building LRT systems, for example, right? One simple thing to do is lay the 5G wire now while you're building the LRT, as an example. And you can save a lot of money, right? So I've seen municipalities do that and not do that. Others then institute innovative renting system and property value as the LRT is built that allows the owner to not only enhance the value, but any new renters aren't paying exorbitant fees, but at the same time, some of that fee is going into the LRT. Like, you're getting these really interesting ways to look at things. It's just, again, it comes back to people. Are the people around the table willing to do that? And as the gentleman said, sort of think out of the box and not be frozen by their reality at the moment. So, yeah,
See,
this
lots of
gentleman
things.
over here was, oh, okay. And then this gentleman here had his hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Mike. Thank
Hi.
you very much for your presentation. The question I have is, in terms of, let's call it the sustainability industry, is there one particular technology that you would champion more than the others, if you could choose?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because there's so many. You know, the one that, and again, it's the I'm going for a home run here, okay? But if I had one swing of the bat, I would go for fusion, because it's a game changer. But you know, I'm facing a pitcher with a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, right? But there are so many, like there are so many going on with digitalization, and I'm a believer, just on saying that is, I'm not a believer on a silver bullet, okay? Like, we need to do everything. We need to be putting money in renewables, and some in hydrogen, right? And some in digitalization, and some in agriculture. Like, we need to have a massive influx of technology across all sectors of society. And so I would never actually pick, okay, one or the other, because I think we need massive amounts of diversity in technology. But if I was having fun and had to have one swing at the bat, fusion would be mine. Yeah. This gentleman over here had his hand up for a while. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Gino. My question is more about education. We were talking about a lot of stuff we've been doing with companies to make themselves align with sustainable development. So as climate change is a society problem, how do we think we can involve not only the companies, but only the society as itself to be part of the change? And this is where we come with education. As we mentioned, all we can do education at university, but as is a problem of society, how we can make education on a larger scale to make everybody, not only the companies, but also the people, to get themselves involved in the fight against.
For sure. So one, I do agree with the first lady who said we should start at kindergarten. So I do agree with that. Second is, I've been involved with a lot of outreach education programs to people to tell them about the science and climate change. And you have to be careful, what I learned is you have to be careful of getting caught in that trap. And what I mean by that is, there are so many things built into our human system, cognitive dissonance, tribalism, et cetera, that often people don't engage, right? Or they listen, but they don't engage. So what I have learned, though, is one of the most important things for us to do to get those people involved is to have conversations among our peers, our tribes, right? So if you're knowledgeable in this area, then I encourage you at all points to engage those people in your network. Don't waste your time on the converted, because they're already there, other than to maybe do the same as you. And don't waste your time on the far, far other side that are not going to change. Because done that many times and it's waste. What's important is in the middle, right? Is in the middle. Those people that are sitting on the fence and not sure what to do and how to do it, and then give them simple things that they can do to grow your, your change management process, right? To grow your revolution. Second is we have to get people to vote. I will say this all the time. We have to get people to vote, right? We've seen the impact of that. And third is we need to get people more engaged in issues. And this is hard given how busy everybody is nowadays. But around climate change, we need a civil rights movement. Like, we have 10 years, and that might be generous, all right? And so we need to take control of this and stop waiting for politicians and private industry and that. We need to take action. And that's a tough one. I know it is. But I encourage everybody to do their little bit, whatever that means. Maybe that's protesting in the street, maybe that's having a dinner to have a conversation, or maybe that's donation, but you need to do something. And we need to get others involved, because I'm full agreement with you. We need a lot more people engaged in this conversation. Yeah. I don't know who's got the, oh, yeah.
Hi, Maria. I have a question, but I want to piggyback on what you just said. I think we underestimate the power individuals have. Absolutely. At the end of the day, corporations and organizations are made out of individuals and not the opposite. And we pay taxes in order to breathe fresh air and drink clean water and to have a prosperous future. And we forget this and we concede power, because power is only given if we concede it. And I really agree with that. And I think right now what's great is that there's a global realization of everything that's going on. My question for you is, in terms of greenwashing, there are so many corporations that want to follow the trend in order to demonstrate corporate social responsibility. Yet we know that within their processes and procedures, they're not applying proper practices that help the environment on our planet. What is the best way to confront them? Because at the end of the day, corporations look at the bottom line when they implement, but at the same time, we want to kind of influence not only those who don't believe in everything that's going on, those who don't, in order to make a substantial change.
So good question. So I mean, the simple answer though is use your money, use your power, right? If you disagree with a policy or a greenwashing tactic, then don't shop there, and then call them out on it. Because I can tell you that companies have war rooms of social media watchers that once they hit certain thresholds, then immediately actions are taken. And so you have tremendous power. The other thing though is to shout out those companies and communities and people who are doing the good stuff, right? So pat them on the back. So take down a notch of an organization group that is not, but pop up those that are. Because often people don't know, right? They don't know what they should do or how they should do it. So share that information. Yeah.
Yeah. Some at the front here
Yes.
that have been raising their hand. Yeah.
Yes, hi. In the same vein, we live in a world where there is enough of our population in this country, in the US and elsewhere, where populists like Ford, like Trump, are being voted in. And I'd like to know what you think about the challenges posed to the future of sustainability in a world where, in the world of Trump, in the world where the US withdraws from a Paris climate agreement.
So they certainly, I'm not going to diminish the threat, and we could talk about that for hours, because I have lots of opinions on that, but I want to focus on the positive, right? Is any time that there is a void in power, it is filled by someone. And I go back to the Harper years, and when the Harper government, the conservative government was in power, the void that was created was quickly filled by provincial and municipal and community groups. And I think that's the same in this day and age, is Trump is, I'll use the US as an example, Trump is gone out of the Paris Agreement, but states, California, right, New York, et cetera, are stepping up big time. And companies are stepping up. At times I'm very disappointed in how quiet companies get, I have to admit. And I think we need to challenge them and call them out. And if anybody has any suggestions, because I have a hard time with that because I may cut my nose off to spite my face, but I sure would like to, and I'm open if anybody has any ideas. Because it's, the silence is deafening in Ontario when the cap and trade was cut. But there are lots of people sort of filling the void, so to speak. So keep your positive hope side up. Where are we? Yeah.
First, thank you so much for taking half of your day and giving back to students. So before this seminar, Mike Gerbis just spent a few hours with students, meeting student organizations and just individual students from McGill and giving insights. Thank you so much for taking half of your day. And my question is, so we just mentioned fundamental change, paradigm change, the responsibility of individuals. And even though I agree individuals have a responsibility through what they consume, through for whom they vote, there are also limits to putting the responsibility on consumers, and we should actually be very careful. We can see it with recycling. We put the industry, actually the plastic industry in the US has been really good at brainwashing everyone and putting the responsibility on consumers instead of doing actual change by themselves. The question is, should companies be responsible for not putting too much the blame on consumers and taking the responsibility on themselves sometimes? Because putting too much the responsibilities ends in greenwashing, where we end up in creating a consumer society. Consumer society where individuals think they are responsible, but sometimes it's actually the industry that should take more action. So do you think it's rather the plural sector, the public sector, that should be in charge of actually saying, no, the responsibility should be put more on the industry, or should the private sector also take part in that work?
Yeah, no, so just to clarify, this is everybody's responsibility, right? I'm not saying one group versus the other. All I'm saying is we need to take responsibility for what we do. And the second is again, back to voting, is if you believe that private sector or government should do more, then you can vote. You can vote with your wallet, or you can vote at the voting booth, okay? But absolutely, I am a firm believer, and hence why the business model, hence why we give 1% of our gross sales to charity, we do all kinds of community giving, is my job as a CEO is not simply to make profit for my shareholders and give bonuses to my staff. That is one small component. My job is to give back to the community, to create jobs, to provide dollars to not-for-profit, to support my community, to vote and change things, right? And that I expect that from the larger corporations, absolutely. In my world, you have, particularly as a leader, you have an ethical and a moral obligation to look beyond just the dollars. You know, that's our responsibility as leaders, whether you're in government or industry or not-for-profit, right? And the challenge is, again, back to our economic system, is these individuals and the company constraints, you know, as someone said, the company is made of humans. They're good people. They're not evil people. Well, there are some evil people, but they're not evil people, right, that make it up. It's the construct that then causes corporations to act like we wouldn't act. I said this to you guys right earlier, to act like we wouldn't act in our own backyard. And so we need to change those, and the companies need to see that. But that, again, comes from individuals. And a great example is we see more companies stepping up around sustainability, not because of the CEO leadership, but because of new staff coming in, okay, or older staff coming over, executives coming over, who are pressuring them to do more things that are responsible. And so that comes back to the individual, right? So that's my focus on the individual, is the individual makes up corporations and governments, and thus it's sort of full circle, right? But I'm not abdicating their responsibility at all. Yeah.
Hi. I'm wondering, given the urgency of the challenge we're all facing on climate change, you've talked about it at length in this talk. I'm wondering, when do we abandon companies that have, led to this crisis, and when do we continue with a kind of incrementalism? You mentioned, digitalization of mining operations and working with the oil and gas sector. I'm just wondering, when do we say, no,
So
we're not going to buy a pipeline, or we're not going to invest in these industries that have systematically fueled the skeptical climate movement? What are your thoughts on that?
So when you say that, though, when you say abandon them, again,
subsidies, political support.
So first and foremost, again, you have to remember they operate under a set of rules that have been established for a long time. And let's take everybody beats up on the oil and gas industry. And again, we work with a lot of these companies, and they're not bad people. They're providing a product and service that raised billions of us out of poverty, right? And you have oil and gas products throughout your home, right? You probably take transit or drive a car, right? We have to remember they didn't do this on purpose. They didn't sit down and say, we're going to create this, material that's going to poison, the atmosphere. They're providing what was a very beneficial product and service for them. So when do we change? That change should be starting now. And that, again, comes from grassroots, from government, from people within the organization. If you abandon them all at once and you say, you're bad and we're good, whatever we are, because solar panels are not the nicest to make, is sulfuric acid and so forth, so, right? Everything has a pro and a con. Then you immediately become us and them, and it's a divisive. And we know where that goes if you look at history, right? So we can't do that. What we need to do is figure out how to get them at the table and moving in the same direction. And that's the tough challenge, right? That's the tough one. But again, that is things like removing subsidies, like you said. Very hard. Oh, wait, you can vote a government in. You can demand, you can write your representative and say, this is what you want. Oh, you can get 1,000 of your friends and colleagues to write a petition, right? Again, that's where we've got to remember, if you look back at history, history changes by grassroots levels. Sadly, just like the US is right now, right? Grassroots, vote someone in, divide, and then fight, right? So you have to be careful at the divisive nature and pointing that finger, okay? Absolutely, there are groups that have funded the denial, absolutely. And that has not been positive at all. But I'm telling you, the playbook that they work under has done the same with tobacco, with pharmaceutical products, with plastics, et cetera, right? That is a playbook that has been developed and has been used by industry, our economic system, for 100 years, right? So again, it needs to change, but we just have to be careful of this divisive, you are bad and I am good. That's just like I used to fight deniers, and again, excuse me in the general statement, but a lot of them were far right, and but that just demonized them. We didn't come closer together. Whereas I sat on the plane a month ago and a lady sat down and said, "Are you a Trudeau lover?" And I thought, oh boy. Okay, here we go, right? And then we started to talk about immigration. at the end of the hour conversation, we agreed, we learned some things about perspectives and disagreed about others, right? And we got closer though, rather than, are you kidding me? You think that we shouldn't allow right, and start that conversation. So I just warn people, because I went through that, the younger people I'm talking to, you know, of this firing up and you're bad and I'm good and this is the better route, and that's not. There's a lot of history and a lot of stuff inside here that we don't control, you know. If you were a CEO of an oil and gas company and you built 30 years, you built your company up, created tens of thousands of jobs, added to the economy, and now someone's telling you you're screwing the planet, whew, that's a hard one to get the brain to wrap around, right? And again, it's hard. I travel all around the country, right? I have 2 cars because I got 2 kids that play in all kinds of sports or used to and that, right? So am I bad? Well, no, I'm just kind of surviving, right? Like in the world we're given. But I'm trying to do my best. Solar panels on the roof, wood stove, electric car, right? And I didn't mean to jump on you. It is somewhere where I've been and I see a lot of people go. And I just want people, this has got to be a conversation and then action, very fast action. And it does require significant change though. I'll agree with you on that.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss climate change and an important issue like this. So you mentioned about like the interdisciplinary nature of the problem, and I was just wondering, what are some of the, I guess, like interventions that the Canadian government is taking to more or less like promote sustainability practice abroad? I'm thinking of, like, say, the issue of deforestation, which is also one of the continuing issue that is contributing to climate change. And I'm just wondering if the Canadian government is also trying to at least broaden their impact so that there could be some sort of collective solution to it.
Yeah, thanks. The Canadian government's very involved internationally, especially this government. I can't speak to all the programs they have, but they work with least developed countries. They contribute to the Climate Fund, which was a $100 billion initiative started back in Copenhagen at one of the conferences of the parties. A lot of our development money goes through, well, it used to be CETA, but goes to countries to address climate change. I used to work in the Asia, for the Asia division as a consultant, and we did a lot of work in China and Pakistan and India around climate change. So they're doing a lot, but I can't tell you the specific programs per se. Yeah.
So we're going to take the last question.
Last question.
I don't mind.
Okay.
It's up to you if you don't. Megan, if you
Megan,
want to go a little longer, it's okay.
You're in charge of
Yeah.
the time.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Hi. So thank you so much for the talk, and I really appreciate the focus on solutions and dialogue. I think that's so essential because it's so complex, this work. One solution, actually, I wanted to share is Planet Protector Academy for those folks who are interested in the education space, especially in primary school education. City of Vancouver really championed them and got them into the school board. Now it's across 100 cities in North America, and they're doing amazing work. I think this point about long-term versus short-term view and the cultural challenges with that is really interesting. I work in social innovation, and a lot of our work, our impact is, generational. And so our ability to translate our work and get resources for our work is in our ability to communicate the proxy indicators in like the 2 or 3 year terms. So I'm wondering if you have examples of folks that are doing really great work translating those long-term investments into short-term proxies that can get people on board faster.
That's a good question. You're starting to see, I'm trying to think of a couple of companies that we're working with. couple of the pension funds, and there's a couple of insurance companies, one I mentioned earlier that we're working with, where they are looking at their portfolio of investment with key indicators that have shifted, right? So they've shifted from simply an economic value to more of a social environmental, so the ESG type work, right? So they will look now at a project and rate the risk not only just on sort of governance and financial return and that, but also with a climate change lens, as an example, which will then either increase the cost of capital or it'll extend the rate of return. That's one example. Some of the companies, a number of the companies are putting a price on carbon within their organizations. In fact, a lot of resource companies are doing that. So when they look at an investment, so let's say they were looking at 2 projects that they wanted to invest in, and one had a much greater greenhouse gas footprint, then it would score lower than the other that had a smaller greenhouse gas footprint. So again, when you put prices on things, right, it shifts the financial payback. Is that a good, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's good. I'm sure there's so many ways to sort of tackle that piece, and I'm looking for good examples.
Yeah.
I think of Climate Smart and
Yeah.
out west, but really targeted to small.
Those are small and medium-sized business. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm getting away. Are we continuing, or are we can do some more? Yeah.
One more
Go ahead.
question? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll keep this short then. I first want to say thank you. As a student, I really appreciate this common space for us to just learn and pick your brains as you are a practitioner in the field. I've learned a lot, so thank you for that. My question is, after digging into a lot of the sustainability movements, I'm finding that it's really correlated with people in places that have high incomes. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts. Like, for instance, you said a leader is Vancouver, but you can also see the correlation that there's pretty high incomes generally in Vancouver. And even like smart home technology, the people who buy into that usually have a higher income. So I wanted to just hear your thoughts on that issue, the fact that sustainability has become correlated with income, and your thoughts of trying to make it more accessible for the general public.
Yeah, good point. We also got to remember, though, the higher income you have, the more impact you have on the world, right? So my first son, by the time he was 6 months old, had a greater footprint than a typical African, right? So what I'm saying there is you need them to move first, right? Is because they have the greatest impact. In terms of shifting it, that is a great question. So there are programs, so for example, social housing. Social housing is an amazing place to impact, 3 legs of the stool: economic, environment, and social, by tackling greenhouse gas emissions, right? Because if you put in new windows, insulation, low-flow shower head, et cetera, retrofit the place, you not only save emissions, you make the house more comfortable, right? You drive down their monthly costs, right? And you usually extend the value of the property. So that's a small, very small example. What we are seeing, though, is a number of environmental not-for-profit groups that are starting to work with communities and the lower end economically within the community. How they're doing that is in things like social housing, education and outreach, and then even policies like the carbon pricing policy, where you would get, the refunds would go back, but you would get more money back for lower income than higher income. It still doesn't quite get to what you're saying in terms of engaging them in the dialogue, I don't think, though, right? Is that, yeah, which is you've stumped me. Last question stumped me. That's a good question. Let me get back to you on that. Let me think about that, okay? I'll give you my card and anything. I think I just want to close, right, is as you've seen by these great questions, is that this topic is so complex, right? And so, again, I'm going to pick on the young lady with the great question is I fully agree with some of the statements made about what we need to do, right? But I've grown the gray hairs realizing how that doesn't work. Your idea to translating it from an idea to implementation is a big leap, right? Given all the constructs we have. And so I think these dialogues are so important, but again, I go back to those conversations with individuals and doing what you can within your sphere of influence, right? So if you're a student and your sphere of influence is 50 friends and colleagues and a few community leaders that you've met, then work as hard as you can within that sphere of influence, right? And then as it grows, then you can start to do things that have greater impact, or they may have the same impact, but it's a greater sphere of influence often. And don't get stuck by all the complexities or the negativity, because that's easily done, and stick to the hope. We have the opportunity, we do have to move now, and we do have to do some drastic things, but we need to do it together. And we need to collaborate and figure out how we keep the divisive stuff out and bring people to the table, but be hard and fast in making tough decisions.
I'm going to say thank you, Mike, and thank you to all of you for joining us. I think that we've heard a lot about the idea that you need a multi-sectoral approach, that you need to bring together business, government, communities, plural sector. But I think that you have highlighted one dimension that is also important, that these efforts need to be very decentralized. Yeah. It cannot be thought of as decentralized. So how do we all engage with an open mind, so I think you've emphasized that, and with an attitude of political mobilization, I think, in all of these sectors, to innovate politically as well as economically, socially, in the public, private, and plural sector. So thank you so much, and we invite you now to join us for a cocktail in the foyer. So
Great.
Thank you, merci.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.